Hi, my name is Zane, and for the inclusion workshop, I am working with Riley, and we decided to focus on accommodating students with a hearing impairment. First, it's important to look at defining what hearing loss is. So first off, hearing loss is determined by an audiogram, which is administered by an audiologist. And what this does is it maps out the sounds that a student can hear onto a graph and separate it into decibels and hertz. Decibels are how loud something is, and hertz is the frequency or the pitch a noise is at. And what this does is it allows us to see the range of noises that a student can or cannot hear. There are several types of hearing loss, the two being sensorineural and conductive. Conductive hearing loss has to do with the functions of the outer ear and the inner ear, and sensorineural focuses on the inner ear and how where the source of hearing loss occurs. When in the onset of hearing impairment, there is acquired and congenital deafness. This means that students with an acquired hearing loss experience it later on in life or shortly after birth, whereas congenital deafness is a student is deaf from birth. Now, when we're looking at the linguistic development of a student, any form of exposure, any sort of exposure that a child has had to written or spoken language greatly aids in their linguistic development, meaning that a student who goes deaf or has a hearing loss later on in life will be able to pick up on these linguistic and social cues more than a student who is deaf from birth. Now we're going to look at the physical, social, and emotional needs of students with hearing impairment. Your biggest thing is going to be the classroom setting. We're looking at where the student is placed within the classroom and the proximity to the visual aids and the teacher. This means that students are going to be able to get a better idea and have a better chance of hearing what is happening in the classroom, as well as looking at the noise levels. Any background noise can inhibit the student from hearing or gathering the necessary information provided during instruction. Language and communication are big tools for students with hearing loss. American Sign Language is the sort of de facto sign language that is used in deaf education. However, there are several types of sign language, nor do all students with a hearing loss use sign language. Another kind is signed exact English, which enables real-time communication. So it's signing word for word as it would appear in English, as opposed to the unique syntax and sentence structure of ASL. And then an interpreter in the classroom is going to be someone who has access to these abilities and can provide real-time communication for the student inside the classroom. Lastly, family education and awareness is going to be one of the biggest tools when looking at assessing students' needs and how family resources can help with this. Now, going back to that point, in order to address those needs, we need to provide at-home education. 95% of students who are deaf of hard of hearing are born to hearing parents. This means that a lot of the times, parents with a deaf or hard of hearing child have had little to no exposure to deaf culture or any of those resources. So communication with support staff at school, awareness on the student's disability, as well as access to other outside resources are going to be the biggest advantages we can give families with students who are hard of hearing. Secondly, we're going to be looking at the immersion. 60% of the time, students with a hearing loss are going to be in the general education setting. And now this means that they get exposure to written and possibly sign language from their peers, as well as the chance to interact with their peers and using unique strategies such as turn taking or sharing notes to be able to interact with them and make sure they're on course with the lesson. This kind of ties in with equitable classroom practices. Now we have passing out notes beforehand or just all of the students to ensure that they have the same list of course materials that are going to be provided during the lecture, as well as assigning a note taker. Sometimes there might be a student in the class who's designated to take notes for the student with a hearing impairment as well as for themselves, enabling them to share more of what they've learned. And for the article, I looked at, this is a study that it looks at a survey that was given to teachers, and it had a list of learning practices and skills. And these teachers were asked to rank them 1 to 10 and find which ones were most useful in educating students with a hearing loss. Now, the first one is techniques for modifying instructional methods. This might mean that you have closed captionings on your videos, or you're writing more stuff on the board, as well as using some of the teacher behaviors I'll talk about next. Approaches to creating a positive learning environment. This is the physical setting, as well as their access to resources and their peers, as well as teaching students to use thinking, problem solving, and cognitive skills to meet their own needs. No two hearing losses are the same, so there might be certain practices that a student can use, such as turning off hearing aids after lecture, or maybe asking the teacher to repeat something that might help them specifically. Next, we've got inclusion, and we're looking at the certain technologies that can really help out students with a hearing impairment. Hearing aids are going to be the biggest tool when looking at students with a hearing loss. I found my old hearing aids right here. These are the little earpiece that goes inside the ear, and the plastic goes around your ear. And it has a microphone that picks up and amplifies noise to accommodate students with a certain hearing loss. Captions are important on videos or any form of visual media because they provide real-time transcription for students with a hearing loss, so that way they don't need to be able to hear the video to see what's going on. As well as, and then there's going to be the DM and the FM system, which is like a little radio component teachers can wear. I had my teacher wear hers around her neck, and it picks up on what the teacher is saying and transmits it directly over to the hearing aid. So that way the student has a clear idea and access to the teacher's voice. Just don't wear it in the bathroom. That's happened before. It's not fun. Teacher behavior. So one of the biggest things a teacher can do to educate students with a hearing loss is staying in view, providing face-to-face communication. Don't cover your mouth, because facial cues and lip reading are another way that students can pick up on what someone's saying. Refrain from writing while talking, because this makes it difficult for the interpreter to translate what the teacher is saying as well as what is being written on the board. And check in on the student, make sure they understand what's happening during the lecture. Lastly, we have the classroom setting. This means that make sure there's nothing obstructing the view of the student. There's no wall or projector that might inhibit what the student can see. Making sure the room is well lit, and seeing that all the students have access to the visual aids because they can see what's going on in the classroom. Dimly lit settings or corners may not be the best place for a student. Face-to-face communication, again, as well as using visual aids. And I think I skipped, here we are, the laws concerning hearing loss. So there are several laws that address hearing loss in school systems. And one of the biggest ones is going to be the early hearing and detection intervention programs. This is outside school. However, each states have programs like this to be able to identify hearing loss in a student at the time of birth. And there are checkpoints at 1, 3, and 6 months. At 1 month, hearing loss will be identified. By 3 months, the degree and the severity of the hearing loss will be assessed. And at 6 months, hearing devices and technologies are fitted for the child, so that way they have access to normal and healthy language development. Next is the Individualized Family Service Plan. This is a plan that gives access to the families on certain resources that might aid in raising a child with a hearing impairment, as well as maps out healthy development and what the family can do to make sure the student is on par with other child development, and making sure they, when it does come time to enter school, they're where they're supposed to be and they're on track. And though this does expire at the start of the child's 3rd birthday, the information in this plan can easily be translated over to an IEP, which allows students and the school staff to get a better idea of what needs we can do to meet the accommodations of the student. And now I'm going to be going over to Riley, who is going to be talking about resources for students with a hearing loss.